Reality is a shadow of a larger reality. And I was blown away when I first saw that, because that's exactly what the Bible's been saying all along. We have all been trained in Euclidean geometry, three-dimensional worlds. Einstein made scientific history by recognizing that we really live in four dimensions by adding time to the mix. Time is a physical property. We know that we live in at least 10. That's the current dimensions. 4 of them are directly, we can experience them. But we know there's 6 others that we can't get at directly, but we know we can infer their existence mathematically. What makes that provocative to people who've discovered that is that a Hebrew sage by the name of Nachmanides, back in the 13th century, predicted that from studying the text of Genesis. He concluded that our universe has 10 dimensions, only 4 are knowable, to use his term, and 6 are not knowable to us. And I find that fascinating, because we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on atomic accelerators to discover what Nachmanides did by studying the text. So the 10, some say 11, there's some debates among mathematicians about details, but there's awareness within the advanced scientific community that we live in more than just the 4 dimensions that we directly experience. If we take those things that are larger than us, larger than man's reach, and just lump that and call that the macrocosm, we suddenly are confronting astronomy, astrophysics, those kinds of things. The great discovery of 20th century science is that the universe is finite. It may be expanding, but it's finite. And that has staggering implications. That means it has a beginning, and it'll ultimately have an end. And that's what gives rise to these conjectures that go under the label of the Big Bang theories. There's 4 of them. None of them quite satisfactory, but that's the common conjecture, if you will. The point being, that's an acknowledgement of the fact that we're dealing with a finite universe that had an origin. But the fact that it's finite is my point at the moment. If we go the other way, looking at what's smaller than man, call that the microcosm, that gets even weirder, because you and I would think that if we took, say, a length, a piece of string or something, and we cut it in half, we'd take whatever we have left and cut it in half again. And at least, maybe not physically, but conceptually, you think we could, whatever we have left, we can cut in half. It turns out, we discover, shockingly, that when you get 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and you try to divide that, what we have there loses a property called locality. And that there's a term in physics of a characteristic called locality. And that observation has actually been proven in the laboratory. In 1987, they actually demonstrated non-locality. Every photon in the universe somehow is directly connected to every other photon. And that defies our normal thinking of space, if you will. But the point I'm getting at is, we live in what we call physical reality has a limit in smallness, and we call it the Planck wall, because whether it's length, mass, energy, or time, it's made up of units that you can't divide. So there's a limit to smallness. There's a limit to largeness. So what we discover what we call physical reality is a digital simulation. And there was an article in Scientific American, June of 2005, which was dealing primarily with the fact that constants in physics seem to be changing, but they make the observation that's profound, that if the constants of physics are changing, that implies that our physical reality is a shadow of a larger reality. And I was blown away when I first saw that, because that's exactly what the Bible's been saying all along. And that leads to a conjecture that the universe, created with 10 dimensions, something occurred to restrict us to the 4 that we experience. Many of us, because of passages in the Bible, Romans 8, and that in Genesis 3, when God declares war because of the fall of man, the creation was made subject to the bondage of decay, the entropy laws and all of that. Apparently we're somehow tied to God's curse on everything we know about the creation is post-curse. Prior to the curse, it may have had 10 dimensions, and for someone it was fractionated. So that some of us tend to regard those 6 inaccessible dimensions as the domain of things like angels, the domain of paranormal behavior. And it's our suspicion that the UFOs somehow are trafficking from those dimensions into ours. And that, it turns out that if you try to speak about dimensions more than 3 or 4, the average person can't relate to it without special training. There are only 2 people that really relate to that. That's mathematicians with special training or small children. And so, but what we can learn a lot about dimensionality by going the other way. You and I are 3-dimensional beings. Imagine if we had a 2-dimensional universe, a piece of paper or a flat plane. We could imagine at least 2-dimensional beings in there. If we had 2 of those, getting from one to the other by them would be unthinkable, but we as a 3rd-dimensional being could pick them up and move them over. To them a miracle has happened, beyond their understanding. If I as a 3-dimensional being put my finger through their 2-dimensional world, they wouldn't see my finger, they'd see a thing that was a ring, and then it would shrink if a ball passed through, it would appear as a dot that would become a ring. In other words, it only would be seeing the intersection of that 3-dimensional thing with their 2-dimensional world. So we begin to get some feeling for what dimension. Another example, if I have 2 beings there in that 2-dimensional world, I could put my finger a millionth of an inch away from each of them, no matter where they are. I can enjoy greater intimacy with each of them than they can with each other. So we certainly read the whole concept of an additional dimension starts to, you get a feeling for what that might mean. The evening of the resurrection, they were gathered in a room, frightened, doors were locked, 6-sided space, 4 walls, a floor and a ceiling. They're there, nervous. And who shows up right in the middle but Jesus himself? At first they're frightened, naturally, confused, thinking maybe he's a spirit or something, and he challenges them. He says, handle me and see. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bone as you see me have. So he, in his resurrection body, has some peculiar properties, because he apparently, obviously, has the ability to enter and leave a 6-sided space without passing through the 6 sides. And a mathematician can deal with it. There's ways of mathematically dealing with that. To a mathematician that's skilled here, he would argue that it would take at least 11 dimensions to do that the way it seems to be described. Fine, whatever it is, it is. John, in his first letter, in chapter 3, verse 2, makes an interesting remark. He says, beloved, it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we shall know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. What I hear that saying is that we will enjoy the same dimensionality he has. If I show you a picture of me, I'm showing you a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional object. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that's more comprehensive. We shall see him as, we will be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So that gives us a glimpse of what the resurrection body that the Bible talks about deals with. But again, see, we're going into what would be called technically a hyperspace, more than 3 dimensions. And that's not easy to do with. I spend more of my time, and as I try to promote the Bible in various contexts, I spend most of my time undoing the effects of bad science. Most of what we're taught in college, not just high schools, is not true. Astronomy is obsessed with gravity, and if you get outside the solar system itself, gravity becomes a non-player. The plasma physicists have been trying to tell us that for years. No one's listening. So that's why we did Beyond Newton as we went into all of that. The electric sky, the fact that when you get out to galaxies, you're talking about electrical behavior, not gravitational behavior. The astronomy world hasn't discovered that, because gravity's instinctive. The James Clerk Maxwell equations are not instinctive. It takes very special study. They behave very different. And that's what David Bohm got coming out of the plasma world, became so fascinated with, and he's the one that predicted at least the possibility that the universe may be really some kind of super hologram. And now they're beginning to get some suggestive evidence that that may be true. But again, the scientific community continually, well, I should put it the other way, our educational establishment continues to feed the kids stuff that is just not true. The nebular hypothesis, the birth of the planets, provably not true, and yet it's still taught at the college level. If you take a course in astronomy, you'll get